everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and welcome to the Law and Crime Network and Law and Crime on Sirius XM Radio. Thank you so much for joining us. As you know, we go live into the most interesting trials across the country today, and we have a lot to talk about, so let's get started right now. We are going to be covering our continued coverage, I should say, out of Florida in the Newman Raja Stand Your Ground hearing. This is out of Palm Beach County, Florida. This is a continuation of a hearing where a judge will have to determine whether manslaughter and attempted murder charges against a former police officer named Newman Raja will either be dismissed or whether the case will proceed to trial. The question is whether this officer was justified in shooting a stranded motorist named Corey Jones. And interestingly, this whole encounter was captured on Jones's roadside assistance call. We're going to talk more about that case in a minute. We're also going to be, I want to give you an update about a case that we have been covering as well. It's the Sean Great case out of Ohio. This accused serial killer who was on trial for numerous amounts of crimes, including the murders of 2 women and the abduction and rape of a third. Well, yesterday, after pleading guilty to 15 of the 23 charges, he still faced aggravated murder and kidnapping charges in relation to the deaths of Elizabeth Griffith and Stacy Hicks, whose decomposed bodies were found in his house. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the jury came back with a verdict yesterday, guilty across the board. He's been found guilty of aggravated murder and kidnapping. Now that same jury will have to determine what his sentence will be. And for the aggravated murder charges, that means the potential of the death penalty. We're going to see that penalty phase, that sentencing phase will continue on May 18th. We're going to cover it here on Law and Crime. But we're going to switch gears right now and talk about another case that we're going to be covering here. This is the Jeffrey Willis case out of Michigan. Many of you who've been following us know we've been covering this one. Jeffrey Willis is, and this is going to start today, Jeffrey Willis is on trial for the kidnapping and murder of a gas station clerk named Jessica Haringa, who went missing back in 2013, and strangely enough, her body has never been found. Now, this guy has been in and out of courtrooms and in and out of the news constantly. Many of you will remember that he has already been convicted in the 2014 fatal shooting of jogger Rebecca Blech. He's already serving a life sentence in connection with her death, and following the Haringa trial, which is what we'll be covering, he's expected to stand trial in the 2016 kidnapping of a teenager who escaped his van. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this case of this accused predator of women is one that everybody is going to be following, and we're covering here on Law and Crime. We have a short report explaining a little bit more about this case. Take a look.
The trial of convicted serial killer Jeffrey Willis is scheduled to begin this week. Willis, who was convicted in late 2017 for the 2014 murder of Rebecca Blech, is accused of the kidnapping and murder of Jessica Haringa. Willis was arrested in connection with the Blech and Haringa murders after a teenage girl who escaped her abductor identified Willis as her captor. Police later searched his home and van and charged him with the unsolved murders. Prosecutors contend Willis schemed to abduct women so he could rape, torture, and murder them. Willis is currently serving a life sentence for the Blech murder and is awaiting trial for the abduction of a teenage girl. For Law and Crime, I'm Rachel Stockman.
We got one serial killer in Michigan, or at least one accused serial killer in Michigan, one in Ohio. I don't know what's going on in the Midwest, ladies and gentlemen, but we're going to switch gears too, because that's not the only case that we are going to be covering. We're also covering the closing arguments in the William Riley Gaul case. Many of you are familiar about this one. This is about that former Maryville College football player who's on trial for allegedly stalking and killing his 16-year-old, that's right, 16-year-old ex-girlfriend named Emma Walker. She was only a high school cheerleader at the time of her death. It's alleged that Gaul fired 2 shots through Walker's bedroom wall while she slept, and one of those shots hit her right in the head, killing her immediately. We expect closing arguments today, and that's interesting because the defense didn't call any witnesses. So what will their argument be? They're saying that this was all a ploy to get her attention. He never wanted to kill her. We'll talk about that case, but really the best way to explain it is to listen to the opening statements. We have a short report about the opening statements from the William Riley Gaul case. Take a look at this.
During opening statements, prosecutors said victim Emma Walker was asleep at night when a bullet fired from outside her house entered her bedroom, struck her head, and killed her. Her family found the body when she didn't wake up in the morning.
And let us figure out who would do this. And every person is going to say, Riley Gaul. Riley Gaul. And so their immediate attention turns to Riley Gaul.
Walker and the defendant had dated. Prosecutors say she started to turn him down, so he staged a bizarre kidnapping ploy to reclaim her attention. Later, they say he dressed in black, walked around her neighborhood to scare her, hoping the strange stunt would allow him to swoop in and rescue her. The night of Emma Walker's death, text messages showed the defendant was pleading.
And he's saying things like, in his text, Emma, I'm begging, 12:09:39, I'm begging, 12:03:47, please God answer, 12:03:50, please I'm begging you. This is 3 hours before he kills her. 12:03:57, I ain't hurt like this. 12:04:01, please just talk to me. This is from Mac's phone to Emma's. 12:04:04, please. 12:04:40, please. 12:06:06, please. 12:06:10, don't do this, I can't. 12:06:28, please.
A few hours later, Emma Walker was dead. Later, prosecutors say the defendant asked friends about getting rid of the gun, which they say he stole from his grandfather. Those friends went to police.
And so on November 22nd, he calls Alex again, and you'll see those texts. And Alex and he and Noah are going to throw away the gun in the Tennessee River because he can't be reasoned with that the gun can possibly exclude him. And the reason he can't be reasoned with is because he knows it's the murder weapon.
The defense admitted Riley Gaul pulled the trigger, but said it was another misguided stunt to scare the victim in the hopes she'd again turn to him for comfort.
Mr. Gaul committed the offense of reckless abandon with the hope of coming to her rescue, of being her hero.
Gaul pleaded guilty to that reckless endangerment charge on the eve of trial, hoping the theory would stick and spare him from a life sentence. After opening statements, the victim's mother, father, and brother testified.
You would agree with me that she was secretive with you about her relationship with Riley?
Yes, because she knew that we didn't approve of it.
And when did that disapproval start?
In 2015, just when I saw she wasn't being treated properly, and then it just increased.
Okay.
The parents tried to keep the two apart.
And you're aware that Emma participated in him sneaking in as well, correct?
I am.
Okay. But it was part of the camera installation to maybe deter that or prevent it or catch it? Which one of the three or all three? I don't know.
I wanted to see if he was actually coming in to my residence without my permission.
Okay.
The case, though, comes down to the two theories. Was this an intentional murder or a teenage football player committing lesser crimes in a bizarre attempt to hold on to his cheerleader girlfriend? This is Rachel Stockman for the Law&Crime Network.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be covering the closing arguments in this case, the William Riley Gaul case, but I think I'm left with more questions than I have answers, so to help me maybe make sense of a little bit of these bizarre details. Again, joining me is criminal defense attorney Yosha Gunasekera. Yosha, good to see you.
It's great to be here.
So break this down for me because I'm confused. The defense is going to come up here today during closing arguments and say, well, wait a second. My client fired, he admitted to it. He pled guilty to reckless endangerment. He fired a weapon into that house, but it wasn't an effort or a plan to kill her. It was just to scare her. But if you look at the direction of the bullets, he fired it parallel to the side of the bed and parallel to the headboard. In other words, he knew exactly where she slept. Firing those shots as opposed to firing it in the air or firing it into the ground, how is that not trying to kill her or injure her?
they're going to try to explain that away again, saying, yes, that was her bedroom, but it was a really lucky shot. He has been trying repeatedly to win her back by doing these very bizarre and strange things.
To the air, why not fire into the ground? Why fire exactly where her bed is?
And that's where the prosecution is going to capitalize on. That's what makes this a very difficult case for the defense. And you're going to see the defense trying to use all that bizarre behavior that Riley Gaul had been participating in, the kidnapping, walking around her neighborhood all in black, to create a cohesive story. Look, this is a kid who is perhaps mentally ill, isn't doing things that other 18, 19-year-old kids should be doing. And this plays into that whole narrative. So it should be interesting to see how they close on that.
I mean, it's really a bizarre set of details. Again, why fire into the house? Were you afraid that she wasn't going to hear the shots? Firing it somewhere else, you weren't going to hear it, but firing it into the house creates more of a dangerous situation where, again, the defense says he wanted to come to her rescue, her white knight. Yosha, it's a tough argument to make. We're going to cover more about this case. What we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we have so much to talk about in the William Riley Gaul case, in the Jeffrey Willis case, so stay tuned. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber. You're listening and watching to Law and Crime on the Law and Crime Network and Law and Crime on Sirius XM Radio. Thank you so much for joining us. As you know, before we went to break, we are covering the William Riley Gaul case out of Tennessee. This is an interesting case about a former college football player who is on trial for allegedly stalking and killing his 16-year-old ex-girlfriend, Emma Walker, by firing 2 shots through her bedroom wall, where one of those shots struck her right in the head, killing her immediately. Now, as we wait for the closing arguments to begin, and we can only imagine what the defense will try to say, because they have really tried to say that this was all a tragic set of circumstances. They broke up. He tried to get her back. He wanted to win her attention. He wanted to win her affection. He didn't mean to kill her. The prosecution has presented a pretty strong case, and the defense has not presented any witnesses. But one of the key witnesses that was presented in this case was Jill Walker. This is the mother of Emma Walker. Now, I want to play you her testimony because Jill was the one who discovered Emma's body, and at first, she didn't know that her daughter was dead, and she didn't know that her daughter was shot. Take a look. Welcome back to Law and Crime on Sirius XM Radio. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the testimony of Jill Walker, the mother of 16-year-old Emma Walker, who was shot in the head. And she was explaining when she tried to wake up her daughter in the morning and what she discovered, this grisly sight. And we're talking about this because we are covering the William Riley Gaul case out of Tennessee, the former college football player who is on trial for allegedly stalking and killing Miss Walker. A really heartbreaking, sad story. Now, we are waiting for the live feed to begin in this courtroom. We expect the closing arguments to begin. So again, I want to bring in criminal defense attorney Yosha Gunasekera. The defense didn't call any witnesses. They cross-examined some witnesses. They put forward this theory that, you know, he didn't want to kill her. He just wanted to fire these shots into the house. It's all part of a weird, elaborate scheme. I mean, how does the defense tie this in to the fake kidnapping plot from that Friday night before the shooting? How do they tie it into the mysterious man in black who was circling her neighborhood the day before? I mean, this is a bizarre series of events. But is this a boy? I say a boy, I mean, he's 18 years old. Is this a guy who really had some mental issues in relation to the breakup? Because, again, he was in a relationship with Emma Walker. Or is this a cold, calculated murderer?
It definitely appears that he has some mental issues. This is just completely abnormal, bizarre behavior, and you would think then that the defense would try to put on witnesses, try to further that theory that this is a mentally ill person. He couldn't form the proper intent. He didn't know exactly what he was doing that night. That's not the way that they chose to go.
Well, Landon at least fight. I mean, you heard from Jill Walker that she didn't hear the gunshots, right? So it was early in the morning when these gunshots went off, maybe 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, or at least that's when we think. There was a big air conditioning unit outside, so it could have muffled the sounds. no one saw him fire the weapon, right? So why not try to say, how do we know definitively, if I'm the defense, how do we know definitively, excuse me, my client's the one that fired that gun? What do we know?
So there's a lot of pieces of evidence in this case that point directly to Gaul. For example, you take the gun. Now, the gun is Gaul's grandfather's, so that connects him to the gun. And then what's really, really damaging in this case is you heard a day full of testimony from Gaul's own friends.
I know. Let's talk about that. So his own friends testified against him. They wore a secret record. They recorded him secretly, where he's telling them not to talk to police. But he didn't admit in those recordings that he shot her.
He didn't admit it, but he did appear to want to get rid of evidence. You hear from his college roommate, you hear from other friends that he asked questions such as, how do I get fingerprints off of a gun?
And the college roommate, Walker Stanley, by the way, so many Walkers in this case, not
there
just
are.
a side note, but Walker Stanley, he said, Riley sent him a Snapchat saying, don't talk to the police. Because Walker saw him come back to the college dorm room early in the morning. Well, I should say, early in the morning, like 4 in the morning.
Yeah.
Where were you coming from? And he also asked him a few days before the shooting, how do you get rid of fingerprints from a gun? So, again, his own friends testifying against him, their own statements are really killing him, right?
It's really difficult. And also remember, he's arrested when he's about to dump the gun and the evidence into the river.
As a criminal defense attorney, you'd be sweating.
Oh, any criminal defense attorney. And this is what presents a very difficult case. It's the defense attorney trying to make strategic decisions in a case where there is just an insurmountable amount of evidence against your client.
And what we can't forget is, what is the underlying relationship here? What's the relationship between Riley and Emma? And what we saw was the testimony, again, of Jill Walker, Emma's mother. This was from earlier in the case, trying to explain their relationship. Take a look.
I guess he was kind of playing them both.
Okay. And you took, of course, whose side of that?
Emma's.
Okay. And so the falling out, the relationship, is that the beginning of the falling out in terms of what you found?
How you treat someone.
Okay. And at some point, do you monitor your child in any particular way in terms of seeing what she's doing?
I mean, yes, but I mean, as a parent of a teenager, check texts, monitor things, see what's going on.
Okay. And so did you do that on a regular basis?
Yes.
Leading up to the fall of when, or rather his graduation in that summer, had you been regular about checking texts and communication?
Yes.
And did you become concerned about those types of things?
Yes.
Tell us why.
Just some of the language and the way that she was spoken to, we didn't feel it was appropriate to speak to anyone like that.
And did you address those concerns with Riley?
Yes.
And how was his attitude towards that?
And we would talk to him, and he would explain he was angry and try to defend himself against it.
Okay. And was he respectful to you?
Face to face, he was respectful to us.
Okay. But would you see something else on the phone?
On phones, it was just angry if we would say no or not let her do something. I felt like some things were not, he didn't respect us as parents. When we said no, we meant no.
Okay. And so what did you do as a result to try and parent your child with regard to her relationship with Riley Gaul?
We tried to discourage her from seeing him. Sometimes you have to give and take a little bit. So we would set limits on how then they could see each other.
In terms of their relationship, did it increase or decrease after he left for college?
And the amount that they saw each other decreased.
Okay. You mentioned he was playing football?
His schedules were busy.
Okay. And though prior to that, how many times would you estimate the defendant's been in your home?
Maybe 2 times a week, just depending on business, 2 to 3 times a week.
Okay. And that's during their entire relationship?
Off and on, yes. I mean, there were periods where it wasn't quite that often, and periods where there's maybe a little bit more.
But in terms of him having access to your home, was there any place he didn't?
Welcome back to the Law&Crime Network and Law&Crime on Sirius XM Radio, everybody. We're covering the William Riley Gaul case out of Tennessee. This is about that former college football player who's on trial for allegedly stalking and killing his 16-year-old ex-girlfriend, Emma Walker, by shooting her from outside of the house into her bedroom wall. One of those shots ultimately struck her in the head, killing her. What we're going to now is a live feed into this Tennessee courtroom. The prosecution is delivering their closing argument. Let's go. All right, you're listening to the prosecution really go after the defendant in the William Riley Gaul case. Again, I'm Jesse Weber. This is Law&Crime and Law&Crime on Sirius XM Radio. William Riley Gaul is on trial for the stalking and murder of 16-year-old Emma Walker, his ex-girlfriend. I want to bring in real quick criminal defense attorney Yosha Gunasekera, who's joining me on set. The prosecution, during this closing argument, really stressing upon the fact that Riley Gaul continued to lie and lie and lie. When you have a defendant that does that, it's really hard for the jury to feel sympathetic for him, right?
It's very difficult, and they're using this technique because they really want to get into his mind and to say he really had the intent to harm and eventually kill her.
Yeah, and I mean, it's hard to argue away. He lied to friends, he lied to family, he lied to the victim, he lied to a victim's friends. I mean, really getting caught up in all this. So the question became, why didn't he take the stand? Maybe it's because, why should we believe him?
Exactly. He's not credible at all in this case. Taking the stand would likely only hurt him. And so it was probably a smart decision on the defense's attorney's part.
Well, we're listening to the prosecution's closing argument. The defense will present a closing argument as well. We'll take a quick break. We'll be back in a minute. Stay tuned. Welcome back, everybody, to Law&Crime and Law&Crime on Sirius XM Radio. You're listening to the prosecution's closing argument in the William Riley Gaul case. This is out of Tennessee. It's about a former Maryville College football player who is on trial for allegedly stalking and killing his 16-year-old ex-girlfriend, Emma Walker. Before we go to our first break, I want to just talk to Yosha Gunasekera, criminal defense attorney, who's on set with us right now. You hear the prosecution really hammering away on all of this, the aggravated stalking, all these kinds of things. But really, what is the defense going to do when it's their turn? Let's not forget what the defense's theory here, that this was a love-struck kid who just wanted her attention. Is it not possible that that's still what it is?
It is possible, at least to the defense. What they're going to do is they're going to spin the very facts the prosecutor is using as damaging evidence against Riley Gaul. They're going to spin those same facts and say, look, yes, he did fake his own kidnapping because he was so in love with her. So as we have all heard, there's two sides to every story, and so the defense is going to share their side.
There's two sides to every story, including a murder trial, which we are going to cover when we come back from this short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Law&Crime Network and Law&Crime here on Sirius XM Radio. I'm Jesse Weber. We are watching the William Riley Gaul case unfold here out of Tennessee. This is about this former college football player who's on trial for allegedly stalking and killing his 16-year-old ex-girlfriend, Emma Walker. Now, you heard the prosecution's closing arguments. We're waiting to hear if the defense will provide their closing argument. Again, I'm here with Yosha Gunasekera, criminal defense attorney. What did you think so far of the prosecution's closing argument? Did you really think that those 5 points about why this was an intent to kill would make sense to the jury?
I think it's strong. I think they're putting everything out there. I think they're cohesively using the evidence that's been presented, and they're really appealing emotionally. That tweet that Riley Gaul sent after he killed her, after he killed Emma.
I love you, Emma. You're in a better place.
Exactly. It's just damaging.
Okay, now it's really damaging the fact that he was 4 to 5 feet away from her bedroom window where he fired the shots. It's also damaging that he fired those shots directly at her bed. He could have fired it in the ground, could have fired it in the air. But here's another question, the flip side of it, because the defense is saying, you know what? He didn't want to kill her. That this is not what his intention was. He just wanted to scare her. So if he really wanted to kill her, couldn't he have done it in a different way? Couldn't he have gone into her actual bedroom? Couldn't he have fired right over her? I mean, how did he know that those shots were actually going to hurt her or kill her? I mean, that's the flip side of it, though, right?
It is the flip side, and that's essentially all the defense has here. They're going to concede, look, he pled guilty. He shot into someone's home while there were people in there. He did something wrong. He's going to go to jail for that, but he just didn't have that intent to kill. He may be a liar, but that doesn't make him a cold-hearted murderer.
And are we 100% positive that he's the man in black? the day before, this person stalking Emma Walker's home?
As you hear from the prosecution, the defense has tried to conflate those issues and tried to say that the kidnapper was him, but the man in black could have been someone else, and the prosecution addressed that directly.
Still a lot of questions, not so many answers.
Exactly.
Yosha Gunasekera, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, it was great to be here. Thanks so much.
Of course. All right, everybody, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in the William Riley Gaul case.